Technologies presents Weld Wednesday with AWS. Brought to you by the American Welding Society. And now your host, Jason Becker.
All right, Brent, welcome to Weld Wednesdays with AWS.
Thank you, Jason.
I saw your presentation at the IEC conference. Well, I've been following you on LinkedIn for a number of years now, but I saw your presentation on visual inspection at the IEC conference last year in Austin, and it was probably by far my favorite presentation of the week.
Oh, well, thank you.
Yeah. And I know you've been in the welding industry for a couple of decades now. Why did you choose welding? How did you get into welding?
I first got interested in welding when I was probably about junior high age, when Dad and I broke a tractor, and one of the neighbors fixed the main case around the transmission and everything for us. He was quite a craftsman in welding, and it really piqued my interest. I kept doing it in high school in ag classes, and my dad bought a welder and kept encouraging me around our family farm. After high school, though, for a couple of years, I drifted off, and when I went to college, I started out pursuing administration of justice. I was going to go into law enforcement, and decided that wasn't for me, and should have gone ahead. I had like 2 classes left to get my degree. I've always kicked myself for not finishing.
I was going to say, that's pretty close.
Yeah, and I encourage everybody anymore. If you've started, I don't care what you start, finish it. Get that degree, even if it's not where you're headed. But anyway,
Yep.
When I dropped that, a friend I'd gone to high school with, his dad had his own welding shop. One of my first mentors in welding, and the guy was fabulous. He taught me a lot over the next couple of years, and I just kept going from there. I've never turned back since. I love welding. My wife will say I'm an information sponge. Every time I sit down, I grab a book of some kind and I start reading. Way back then, I had Lincoln's Procedure Welding Handbook and a couple of others, and I read those things cover to cover. I don't know how many times. Very little, a little bit of college up at Portland Community on welding for one job I was at. But for the most part, it's been self-taught and a bunch of fabulous mentors along the way.
I think that's been the biggest benefit in my career too, is the mentors.
Yeah.
The people that, they've been there, they've done the work, and they want to help you out.
Yeah. I can't encourage people enough to be mentors and to find a mentor. That's just a key to any career, even if you've had some schooling in welding. It just will help you tremendously.
Oh, for sure. Even my mentors have mentors.
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
crazy. And the funny thing, that's the great thing about the industry or the welding industry more specific, is it's such a big industry, but it's a very small, tight-knit community. You go to these seminars and conferences and expos and all these different things, and you always see the same group of people.
Yep.
So that's a really cool part. You've got all these titans of the welding industry that they all kind of hang out. They know each other, they respect each other's work, and they're constantly teaching each other new things. And we get to, I call it nerding out on welding, because you go to these things that, like, I can't go in and talk to my wife about, the different specs and stuff. Like we were talking before, D11, D12, going through the code books and writing procedures this past couple of weeks. I can't go in there and talk to my wife about that. She just look at me, kind of like my dog, just tilt her head to the side. Like, I have no idea what you're talking about. But I go to one of these conferences and, we were chatting right before the episode about like some of the specifics in D13.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's my people. I found my people, and welding just kind of has that influence where it pulls everybody in.
Right. It sure does. You can't be in this without learning something. And I encourage people, there's a lot of misinformation or misinterpreted information out there. And you've got to ask the right people the right questions to make sure you get to the bottom of what you're trying to find out about the work that you're doing. A simple illustration of that would be you'll hear people say when doing welder qualifications, which we were just talking about, you can only use a slag hammer and a wire brush when you take a welder's test. Well, there's only one code that I'm aware of that requires that.
D15.
Yep, D15, bridge code. Other than that, if an employer wants you to test that way, then yes, you're going to test that way. But there's only one code that requires it.
Right.
But if people just openly state all the time because they had heard that someplace or they took a test and had to do it that way, all of a sudden they think that applies to all tests. And,
Right,
you know, you can't mix your codes, but people don't understand how many codes and how many applications that we have.
There's so many. I mean, you got, all the D1 codes from AWS. Then you get into ASME. You got API. Then there's ISO. There's DOT. Certain states have their own.
Oh yeah.
Their own codes. I mean, certain counties even have their own codes. I know Los Angeles County. They have like their own welding code in addition to D11. I think Chicago's another one, and New York. They both have state standards in addition to whatever code you're testing in.
When we got ready to do the Wilshire Grand Hotel, the inspections for the shops doing prefab here in Arizona, that job went to downtown LA. But you had to go over to LA and take their city of LA tests. And you had to know the state, the county, and the city codes for that area, taking their tests, as well as the IBC, AISC, D1.1, D1.3, D1.4, and D1.8. They didn't just want you to have your CWI with D1.1. You had to know all those other codes also.
Well, yeah, they got all those seismic requirements and stuff out there because of the earthquakes.
Absolutely.
They've really done their due diligence with that one.
For sure.
Yeah, like you were saying with the misinformation that's out there. The funny, well, it's not funny, and it's kind of funny now looking back at it. I was always taught when you're doing a test plate, D11, you had to do a start and stop through the root. That was something that I was always told growing up. That's something that until I got my CWI and went through, welding or to go to the seminar to get my CWI, I always made my students do a start and stop on the exam. Which, I mean, it's not a bad practice.
No.
I mean, the CWB's incorporated it. I mean, you got to do with CWB, I think on their structural exam, there's 2 starts and stops that have to be performed at very specific spots. But then as I get to reading D11, there's no requirements for a start and stop for welder performance qualifications until you get into D12.
Well, except for fillet welds.
Oh, yeah, right, fillet welds. But I used to make them do it on all their groove welds.
Right.
Flat, horizontal, vertical, overhead, and then I was like, "Oh man, yep, never needed to do that." But you're right. There's a lot of misinformation, and the only way you can figure out for yourself is to find a mentor, but then go back and reference and read the code books, and they're not light reading by any stretch of the imagination.
No.
You really have to go in. I was talking to Scott Wachowski. It's like you saying you can't just open the code book and start reading it. It's not like the Encyclopedia Welding. You can't just go cover to cover and read that. You have to go in with a specific question. Otherwise, either way, you're still going to bounce around, a number of different pages to get to where you need to go.
Yeah, but you know what? I learned a lot the first time I read D1 cover to cover.
You actually read the whole thing? Well, I think I did at one point. I read through each clause, not with it's difficult to do. Especially because this clause refers you to that one, this refers you to that table. So it's difficult to do. But when I was studying for my CWI, I read through just to find out what information was covered in each section, just so I had a better idea of if that question pops up, I know what clause and kind of what area to reference.
Yes, and after I got my CWI and a fellow inspector who was also a great mentor of mine then in inspections, as opposed to starting out just in the welding industry, he calls me up because he'd done inspections on my work for our shop down here. And he says, "Hey, I hear you passed your CWI." And I'm going, I just got the notice. How'd you know that I passed? He goes, well, it's a small community. And he goes, are you just wanting to use this in your shop, or do you want to actually start doing some inspections? I said, my wife and I want me to get out of pump and iron all the time and do a little bit of inspections work. He says, good, because I got lots of extra work. I could use some help. So this is, I'll go ahead and use his name. It's Kenny Green with Warrior to Inspector up in Flagstaff. So Kenny's a great guy. He put me to work in a shop doing the inspections for the engineers. And I'm up there on graveyard shift, and they had a small welding crew. So I'm sitting in the office most of the time, and I happen to notice he's got an AISC 360 up on the shelf. Now, you want to talk about boring reading, pull one of those down cold turkey and read it cover to cover. But I did that over the course of about 2 weeks. I went through that book cover to cover. And I kept finding things, and I'm going, that's why they say you have to do this. That's why, it's one of those things. D11 gives you the welding code, but AISC gives you so much more in why everything's designed like it is and why the holes are the sizes they are. And, it's phenomenal. And this is a never ending learning experience. I don't care if you're in the welding side of it, the inspection side of it, both sides. You can't stop learning in this industry, because about the time you think you've got it down, they go in and they change something.
Oh yeah, that's the funny thing is people a lot of times they throw out the term master welder. Like
Right.
My uncle was a master welder, or my grandfather was a master welder, and it's like, I don't know if this is a skill set you can master. I mean, yeah, you can test out a bunch of processes and positions, but you're never going to be certified to weld everything.
No.
You're never going to know everything about welding. And just when you think you do, like you said, they republish the code books. There's a new edition that comes out. And I think that's what I was never, I've always been fascinated with welding, but I was never truly passionate about welding until I got into education. Once I got to the point and I've always wanted to understand the hows and the whys, so I kind of already had that background, but I had to dig a lot deeper in order to convey that information to a group of students. In order for it to make sense to them, something that's completely foreign, to be able to take that information, break it down super simple, and give it to the students in a way that they can understand it, I had to learn how to understand it at a much deeper level.
Yes.
So I had to do a lot more research, and it was going through code books, going through AWS specs, doing some of the AWS online courses, going to a lot of these conferences and seminars, YouTube videos. And you can get lost in a plethora of misinformation on YouTube videos. So be careful using that as a resource. But there's some good instructors out there, don't get me wrong, but there's probably twice as many bad ones. So, but yeah, it's been a never ending process of learning welding. And then you add inspection on top of that. And it's like, man, this is a whole nother ball game. But
Right.
Now a lot of the stuff that I had to do as a welder makes a lot more sense. Like you were saying with the AISC 360, that's why the bolt holes are that big. That's why the orientation of the nut on the bolt actually matters. They don't explain that to you when you're stuffing bolts. They're like, yeah, go up, put it in there, make sure the nut faces this way and the washer actually sits this way, and then crank it out. Why? Well, because I said so.
Yeah.
Oh, well, that's not going to help me.
Yeah, and that goes across everything. We get to talking about welding procedures and stuff. So many guys in shops and in the field, they've never seen a welding procedure. The bosses have them because they have to, but they don't show them to the welders. They say, do it this way. Why? Mm-hmm. Because I said so. Well, that doesn't really help anybody. They need to know why it's there and why they need the preheats and why they're using this electrode and, the whole gamut of what that welding procedure actually entails. And, bolt holes. So many people don't realize, they think that all bolt holes, including the ones for your anchor rods and a base plate, have to be within a 1/16 of an inch of the size of the anchor. They don't realize that holes for anchorage are considerably larger than the whatever type of anchor they're using coming up through there, so that they've got room for mislocation and moving things around to get it all in line and everything. It's just everything has so much that a person has to learn. And it goes way beyond just striking an arc and running a bead. So
Yeah, and I wish a lot more companies understood that, especially having a welding procedure specification in shop and having or allowing the welders to have access to it. Because most of the company owners or, the supervisors or, whatever, they may have one. They probably don't know how to read it themselves.
right.
And take it down there to the shop floor, show the welders, because the information they need to produce these products and these good welds and repeatability, all that information is on these forms. Laminate them. They should be in the welder's toolbox. Well, they're going to take them. Good. They're going to go do good work somewhere else, because when I drive across the bridge with my family in there, I want to make sure that the welder knows what they're doing.
Yeah.
So I've had that conversation with several employers. I'll get people that call me up all the time. Hey, I need to test it. I had a guy call me up today. Hey, I need a 6G aluminum cert. Okay, do you have a WPS for that? Because I do not. well, no. I said, okay, well, I can't just have you come into the shop and, slap two pieces of aluminum together and weld it out and, go do the required visual and destructive testing on there. We have to test it to a procedure. I mean, we can do that, and I can, when you're done, if everything meets code, I can give you a big old pat on the back and an attaboy.
Right.
But I'm not writing any documentation on that. We have to tie it to a procedure, and there's reasons for that.
Absolutely. They just plain. So along with that, part of the problem with even management having them, by being in one particular set of shops, two shops in particular here in Arizona that my two oldest sons that are also in inspections and I have been in this one company a lot out here. And so we have gotten to see them many years go through their AISC audits. And every year the welders, same guys, not the new guys, the same guys are asking the same questions, and they still don't know how to weld that or read that welding procedure. And you're just going, really, guys? Is it this complicated that we have to reteach you every single year? It just, and this company actually does keep them out on the shop floor. They're actually attached to every welding machine out there. And we keep telling them as outside inspectors, go look at your welding procedure. Go look at what's it say for preheat? What's it say for amps and travel speed and etc. And even if they go look at it, they don't know. And you're going, this isn't that complicated, guys. Not for as many times as we've walked you through the process. I don't know if, I got to tell you, sometimes I wonder how interested a lot of people in our trades are to actually learning what they're doing versus just drawing a paycheck. That's a sad state to be in, but I see so many that I feel like it is that way. So when you get these guys that do come out of a decent trade school or an apprenticeship program, and they're actually wanting to apply themselves, man, those guys get snatched up in a heartbeat. And they're able to go places and actually make some decent money and provide a good living for their families because they do know what they're doing. And companies spot that and they're willing to compensate for it.
Yep. I've noticed throughout my career teaching that I could always tell what student's going to get hired first right out of the gate.
Right.
And who's going to make, the best pay out of the program. And it's usually the student that, they'll go in there and they're already evaluating their own welds.
Yeah.
And then they're coming back, hey, Mr. Becker, how do I improve this? Or why does it have to be like this? Or, what does this mean? Hey, can you tell me a little bit more about this? The ones that they're not doing it just for the sake of drawing a paycheck or getting a job when they get done. They're actually genuinely interested in what they're doing, and they want to be better. So they want to know the how, they want to know the why, and those are the ones you can't keep them out of a booth, At the end of the day, you're like, hey, it's time to clean up and go. Like everybody else is already gone. I need you to clean your booth and get out of here. We got night classes starting soon.
Yeah. Well, and the fun part about those students, though, is they challenge us to also keep learning more.
Oh yeah.
So
And the first year that I taught, Esteban Velarde, I don't know if he'll listen to this episode or not, but he was one that he would go home every night and he would do research on welding, and then he'd come back and pick my brain the next day. So I was in the whole year, I'm trying to stay one step ahead of him. I'm like, what's he going to ask me tomorrow that I need to know, tonight? And the great thing was, if I didn't know, he'd ask me a question. If I didn't know, I'd flat out tell him, you know what, Esteban, I don't know, but I'm going to find out. And so I'd go back and, I started a small collection of different textbooks and codes and stuff like that. Or, I'd be able to call somebody up and say, hey, do you have any information on this? And be able to, get that answer to him. So a lot of times we'd go turn it into like a research project almost, and we'd go find out together.
right. That's a fun part for me about being on the AWS welding forum, LinkedIn, and other places, because it keeps me challenged. By answering questions, I have to keep grabbing my books off the shelf to make sure that what I'm about to say is right. And it's always when you don't grab the book, you think you know, and you type something down, that then somebody like Al Moore comes back and says, you better look at that again. And
Gives you the chapter and verse.
yeah, but it is that the welding forum is a great resource, but it's just like anything in computers. A guy can spend so much time there that you're not doing your own work the way you should be. You can also get misled, even by guys that should know because they misspoke. And so you have to be careful, and you have to chew the meat and spit out the bones. And we've said for years, you got to know your resources and just know who you can listen to and know who you need to double check. And it doesn't matter where you're getting your information. I've found mistakes in some of our welding reference books from AWS. So it just you got to watch everything.
Yeah, it's bound to happen.
Yeah.
Now, when did you kind of transfer from like doing the hands-on welding portion into getting into inspection? What prompted that kind of, I don't want to say level up in the career, but like what caused that change of trajectory in your career?
So I actually started doing some QC work in a shop I was at up in Portland, Oregon. That's where I'm basically from until, well, okay, so I'm old enough. It sounds like I've been down here a long time. I've been here for almost 30 years now. But my wife and I both came from the Portland, Oregon metro area out on the foothills of Mount Hood. And while up there, one shop I was at, I got wrapped up in doing a bunch of QC work. And then it just kind of built from there as I went from shop to shop and field jobs. I kind of started doing quality control for different places. But it wasn't until I came down here and finally, because of my shop work and wanting to do some transitioning in 2008, that I went ahead and took the CWI and got past it. Back then, that was quite a challenge. We didn't have the online resources. We just had to buy the books and start studying. So and that was due. My wife one day, I had put my back out. I came home and I'm going, man, I'm getting too old for this. She says, we've always talked about that as people get older, they need to be the teachers and the inspectors and work with the next generation. She said, so do it. So I got online, I checked out AWS. I was already a member of AWS. I started checking out the CWI program, signed up for the seminar and test down in Phoenix and took it. And then, like I say, Kenny called me and I've been doing inspecting and welding ever since. During COVID, I myself kind of backed out. I told my boys and my wife, I'm not going to travel anymore. The boys and I had been traveling coast to coast, South Carolina, Florida, West Coast, California, Oregon, you name it. We've been in almost every state. I got one of the boys up in Maine right now on a job. Well, I don't have him there. During COVID, I told the boys they were getting some great offers by other companies who didn't want us as subcontractors. They wanted to put them on payroll. So I farmed out the boys, but he's up in Maine and they both travel around and take their families with them. But I started just staying here in the local area and getting back into some welding as well as inspecting just here in the county, central Arizona area where we're at. I got a little burned out on flying around all the time or driving from one end of the country to the other. And so now the only time I do that's teach seminars down in Austin or something.
There you go. That's a good time to travel.
Yeah.
What's it like going through TSA with all your inspection tools?
I didn't. I shipped them.
That's probably a better way to do it.
Yeah. It's hard. It's hard to get through them with stuff, although I know some of the guys do it. They just flat tell them, no, I'm not putting this stuff in whatever luggage to have you guys beat it around in the luggage, baggage stuff. And they take it on in their carry-on. But it's, especially at certain times, you know, they've really been sticklers for what you could take on and what you couldn't. And so I just box it all up and ship it to one spot or another unless I was driving, and then I took it with me. So
I got you. That's when I passed the CWI exam. They give you that kit of all the different tools. You know, you got your VWAC gauge in there, your fillet weld reinforcement gauge, your butt weld reinforcement gauge, like all those different gauges. The flashlight, magnifying glass, the whole nine. I took a Pelican case and I bought that Kaizen foam, and I cut everything out just so. And then once I was done, I sprayed it with that Plasti Dip.
Yeah.
I sprayed everything down with Plasti Dip, and that's what I keep all my inspection tools in at the school. So I don't have to worry about, you know, dinging up my tools or anything like that, because I mean that's how you do your job.
And
so
they're not cheap.
You can't afford to. They're not. You can't afford to lose one. I mean, you can replace them, but I mean that's part of, you know, if you need that specific tool,
yeah,
you know, it's hard. I mean, you got to take care of your stuff. I think my favorite tool, I think the most versatile, that I use pretty much every day, is my bridge cam gauge.
I like
that thing it's so valuable.
I actually don't use the bridge cam that much.
No?
I like my fillet weld gauges. I like my skewed gauge for doing skewed plates. A lot of guys go nuts when I pull that one out because a lot of the inspectors have never seen it and they don't know how to get back in there to measure the fillet, quote unquote, fillet welds back inside of a skewed plate. So when I pull my gauge out and I tell them, no, that weld's too small, they're going, where'd you get that? You know, so you got to give them gal gauged resource so that they can get one for their own department, and then they can check them themselves. But yeah, I probably use the skewed, the VWAC, and the fillet weld gauges the most. I do use the bridge cam because it comes in good for checking butt weld reinforcement and different things. But well, like I taught in that class down there in Austin, as far as I'm concerned, if a guy's going to ever even think he's going to court on an issue, the only gauge that really makes a solid, definitive, this is yes or no, it's to the right size, is the fillet weld gauge.
Yep.
Too many guys don't quite know how to really read where the end of that bridge cam is, and they'll say, yeah, that weld's big enough, when it's really not. And it just, even the fillet weld gauges though, I've seen people look at those things and they'll say, yeah, that's a 3/8 fillet. I come along and I'm going, nope, it barely qualifies as a 1/4 inch. You don't know how to read your fillet weld gauge. You know, so everybody's got to know how to read the gauges properly, no matter which one you use. The bridge cam's a very versatile gauge for being able to check undercut, everything. And I carry it all the time. It's in my pouch. But when I'm sizing and actually making a record in my report of how big the weld is, I like to use my fillet weld gauges.
Yeah, anytime I'm messing around with a fillet weld, I use the fillet weld gauges. I mean, it makes more sense. I mean, you can get by with a bridge cam gauge doing it, but I prefer to use the actual fillet weld gauges. And a lot of people, and I don't know why they put that line on there. They try to line that, you know what I'm talking about. You're nodding your head. They got like that little scribe line on the inside of there. It's like, no, just delete that thing. Flip the gauge over, even though you can't read the numbers on the back. You know what size you got in your hand. Flip it over and then check that, the opposite direction.
Yeah.
That way you're checking both toes of the weld equally. A lot of people, they stick that blade up there against the weld, and they're hitting the top toe, and then they're kind of eyeballing that little line there to go down to the toe of the bottom weld. It's like, no, don't do it that way, please.
Right. Yeah. No, again, it's a matter of proper training and realizing that is pure speculation. It might be close for some applications, but for us as outside inspectors representing the engineer and guaranteeing public safety, we can't be guessing on the size. We got to know for sure.
Yeah, you got to know exactly, because at that point, once you file that document, that's a legal binding document.
Yep.
You said it passed.
Yep.
And if somebody goes back and determines that's a lie, your name and stamp numbers on that form that you submit.
Exactly. So
now, when you excuse me, when you go out and do these inspections, what's the most common discontinuity you're typically coming across?
Probably undersized welds. Second would be undercut, and third, overlap. I think that's probably a pretty good general idea of what I see most. As far as discontinuities go, you'll see all kinds of other things. So welders that aren't qualified in a particular process, and here they are using it on the job, they think that if you're qualified with one wire, you're qualified with all wires as far as GMAW and FCAW, which in ASME, I believe a lot of that does cross over. I'm not positive because I'm not a big ASME guy. But when it comes to D1.1, they don't cross over at all.
Right. It's two separate processes.
Yep. So, there's always things like that you got to watch, or people who took a fillet weld test and then the boss puts them on groove welds, and you're going, no, he cannot weld that. Not yet. So, but there's all kinds of little things we have to keep an eye on all the time. But as far as discontinuities, I'd say undersized weld is the biggest. Now, then you get into things like, guys like Lawrence Bauer really push, and it's a great course. The, now I forgot the name of it. Welding supervisor, certified welding supervisor, because it teaches you how fast, when you oversize a weld, you slow down the time, you're adding heat and stresses to the parts. But the biggest thing is all the consumables and the added expense you're adding to the job really quick without adding too much. So it's critical that people learn how to run the right size weld the first time through, so they don't have to go back, redo it again, but they don't have a whole bunch of extra weld on there either.
Yeah.
So
if only there was a document that would tell you what voltage and wire feed speed and travel speed, as a welder. It's Go back and read the WPS.
Yeah,
And like
yeah.
all that information's in there to tell you exactly how fast to go. And once you learn how to run the appropriate size fillet weld, I mean, welding is so much muscle memory.
Yeah.
So once you get the settings dialed in, and I tell people, if you're not sure, grab a piece of scrap material. And a lot of people, when they dial their machine in, they want to take a piece of flat plate and just run a quick bead on plate. And it's no, don't do that. Go if you're trying to size up a fillet weld, or you want to make sure that machine's going to run good for a fillet or a groove weld, set up like a 4 or 6 inch mock sample and get your machine dialed in that way. Make sure everything's going. That way, once you pull the trigger or you strike that arc, you know exactly what you're going to get. And as a welder, I think that's one of the things that I always taught in class was how to read a fillet weld gauge, because you can pick up a set of fillet weld gauges. Even with a non-gal brand, you can get pretty close as a welder to knowing whether or not that's going to pass.
Yes.
So before that inspector even comes over, that's always been my favorite discontinuity is underfill and undersized welds as a welder.
Right.
Because that just means, okay, I'm not done welding on this part yet.
Right.
That's all that means right there. I can't stop just yet. So it's the easiest discontinuity to fix.
Well, and another thing, when people are first starting out, besides what you said about a small mock-up, that's great to get it started. And then I've told a lot of people, when they're, especially younger welders, when they're first starting, grab yourself a piece of 1/4 inch square, 5/16, 3/8, cut yourself a piece about a foot long, then lay it in along your fillet weld, take your soapstone and mark both legs. And then when you start welding, make sure you're getting up to your soapstone mark. You're not too big, you're not too small, you're right there where you need to be. And once they get going, and like you say, it's then from there, it's hand-eye coordination and muscle memory. Once they get going and they know what they've got to do, then it's pretty easy to run the right size weld through the whole thing.
Yep. I did that the other day with just scribed a line because we were doing aluminum plate. So I just scribed a little line right there because we were developing a welding procedure for 1/4 inch aluminum plate. So we scribed the lines on there, say, okay, you'll be able to see that under the hood, go ahead and run it. And it's easier to get the travel speed right the first time doing it that way because you get the appropriate weld size for the leg lengths.
Right. Yep.
Now, when you go to these different shops and companies and job sites and stuff like that, do you ask for the welder certifications and make sure that, they're in accordance with AWS and the contract documents and all that?
Absolutely. That one advantage to being out here where we're at and doing a lot of work in some of the same shops over and over, you get to know a lot of your welders, as well as the engineers that I've worked with a lot usually send me the procedures and stuff up front so that we've got them in our files for the job. But when it comes to the welders, I take their information and I go out on the shop floor, meet the guys, find out who's who, look at my logbook and go, okay, yep, this guy's qualified to do this one's qualified to do that. A lot of the shops, most of the guys are qualified to do pretty much anything they're going to do, because they don't, around here, it's not like I'm getting into a job like on a nuclear plant or something else where you've got a lot of exotic metals. It's pretty much all standard structural steel. So, and most of them only have 1, maybe 2 welding processes, and they're rolling the parts. So all they got to have is flat and horizontal, and you're good to go. They're going to do very little out of position work unless you're out in the field on the inspection. So it is, once you get into a couple of the shops a couple of different times and get to know everybody, it's not as big of a deal. Now, personally, and I know a few of the other inspectors are doing it more and more, and I think the new sample forms in the back of D1.1 and some of the other codes have a spot for it. I started a long time ago. I take pictures of guys when I do welder qualifications, put it right on their cert. That way I don't ever have to look at anybody's ID. I could care less what they said their name was or anything else. All I got to do is look at that cert and go, yep, that's you, And From there, it's no problem just to double check then what he's qualified to do and make sure that he's not stepping off on something he's not qualified for.
Yeah, that was the WPQRs that I always filled out prior to opening up the ATF. I would always take the welder's photo, stand up against, like a white backdrop or something like that, take their photo, I'd put it in there, and it's never a very flattering photo, but I mean, it works. I mean, like, they'll be able to identify you.
Right.
That's one of the things, because I know when going through the ATF, that's not a requirement in that portal, which maybe in the near future it will be, is, a photo of that welder.
Right.
Because you could, oh yeah, my name's John Doe. Here you go. Here's my paperwork. Okay. Well, now you got to match it up with a driver's license or, identification card of some sort. Oh, I don't have it on me today. Well, so now you're splitting hairs at this point. You're really getting into the weeds on this. So it makes it difficult. Now, I was talking to my buddy down here, Ray Flannery. He does a lot of inspections. He does specialty type inspections. And he said, there's got to be a better way to, like, pull a welder cert. If they're not qualified to do the work, how do you pull their cert? Because if somebody goes out and they get certified, and they follow a WPS and all that, they've got the documentation. You show that to the inspector. Well, the inspector pulls the cert, rips it up, says, hey, you're not welding on this job anymore. Okay, cool. He leaves, gets a job somewhere else, goes home, hits Control P, on his printer, and he's back in the game.
Right.
Until somebody else stops him. So there needs to be like a standard way of doing it.
Well, first off, that's why we really push the fact that every manufacturer, fabricator, erector needs to qualify their own welders.
Mm-hmm.
Sure, the guy's got a copy of his own certs. Bring it in, show me, okay, that's a foot in the door. I know you're able to pass a test. Yeah, I'm more apt to give him a shot than I am somebody who's never taken a test before. But I'm still going to certify them at my place. I don't even care if they got certified through an ATF and they're on AWS's national registry. You're still going to take my test.
Yep.
That's just the way I am. And when it comes to, I have a problem with inspectors tearing up anybody's certs. They need to just send a note in their report to the engineer saying, I have an issue with this particular person. Something's not right. And it's up to the employer to make it right and or pull them from the job under the guidance of the engineer. There have been lots of jobs that with the engineer, the city building authorities, county, whoever on the particular job, they've come to me and they've gone, look, this guy put this up. Turns out he doesn't have certs. Would you certify him? Sure, I can certify him. And if it's within 1 or 2 days, common sense says he was probably as good when he welded that up as he is now when he takes the test. Is it right? No. But as long as all of them are willing to take the liability and everything else and accept him, as long as he passes the test now, then it's not up to me to argue with him. I give them a test and see if they can pass it. As long as they pass it, hey, we're good to go. But inspectors have to be careful about a lot of things. There's a lot of jobs where you don't actually have the authority to stop a job or pull a welder. It's only our job to observe and report. And from there, the engineer has to take it. An issue I have with that scenario, though, is I can't tell you how many times we have turned in reports and constantly logged it and even added another page to my report system that is my NCR and said, there's an issue here. There's a nonconformance. I need the engineer to respond to this. I haven't been able to get a hold of him on the phone. I can't get a hold of him by email. I put it in my reports. A year after the job is finished, erected out in the field, and occupied, the engineer calls up and says, oh, how did we resolve that issue you had on this job? I'm going, wow. Well, you tell me. I gave it to you and I put it in 6 consecutive reports. What did you do with it? if you're not reviewing my reports, you're not doing your job because you didn't hire me to put a stop order on this job. Now, when you first start a job, you can mix with some of these guys a little bit and find out, look, what type of authority do you want to give me? Do you want me to be able to stop the job at certain points? Or is this totally like we're taught through most things? Is this just a matter of I observe and report to you and you're the only one with the authority really to stop that job? So, I've had engineers, we've gone back, we had one erector, it's been about 5 years ago now. We had him totally take down a 3-story building that he'd already had most of the steel up on. They were using short arc on the welding. They were using stuff they weren't supposed to be. They weren't properly qualified for the work that they had done. And I went through and I just went, nope. And I called the city and the engineer right off the bat. They put a stop on it. We had a big meeting out at the job site and they told the guy, take it all down, go have Brent properly qualify you, and then take and start it all over again.
Whoa.
Yeah.
That's a big expense.
Somebody lost some money on that one.
When you requalified him, you didn't do it in short circuit, did you?
No. He learned how to properly run spray arc.
There you go. That's a hill I'm willing to die on right there. I see that so often. People probably get tired of me talking about it on the podcast, but like the more I talk about it, the more people find out that's a great process if you're running sheet metal.
Yeah.
Outside of that, switch over to a spray or a pulse spray or switch out your wire. Step over to a gas shielded. We'll get you certified in that, and you can run all the thick material you want with gas shielded flux core.
Yeah.
If it's as long as it's the appropriate wire, because there's some that are 5/16 and below limited. They're designed for sheet metal.
The old NR211 that we used a lot of back in the 70s and 80s, and you just don't. I tell guys, keep that stuff off my job sites. I really don't want to see it here at all.
Don't even want to see the package.
No. So,
I had a company call up and they're like, "Hey, we're doing like you told us. We're trying to certify our welders here in shop, and man, we're running this self-shielded flux core, and like we cannot get one plate to pass."
Hey, yep.
And I'm like, okay, like walk me through. Like what's your? And I'm thinking like immediately, what's your root opening? Okay, how qualified is the guy to do it? What's your settings? What wire are you using? All that. Oh yeah, we're using this 211. I was like, okay, so here's your problem. That's limited to 5/16 and below. So you've got the problem you're running into is weld metal dilution. So you switch over to like a 233 or 232, or Hobart makes a good one, the XLR8 wire. Run that stuff if you're getting into the 3/8 territory.
Yeah, for sure. And
that stuff burns hot and true.
Yeah, exactly. And even when they use some of the right numbered stuff, it also makes a big difference if they've gone to a decent manufacturer. I tell people out there, go to your big names. Don't even use the cheapy stuff at some of these stores. And so much of your 7018 is junk the minute it comes out of the store at some of these local welding supplies in small communities, because they get cheap stuff in for hobbyists and farmers and stuff like that. Great for their use, but it's no good for structural steel. And you can run all kinds of different tests and just show them, look, this stuff isn't going to work worth beans, and it's already been exposed to the atmosphere too much. That is not a properly sealed container that it came shipped in. And trying to walk them through that process. My local supplier up here loves me. In the last few years, he's sold more rod ovens than he even knew existed.
That's good. I didn't know rod ovens existed outside of school until I became a CWI. I was like, oh, we're supposed to actually, no, it was when I was with the union. We had them on the job site, and I'm like, wait, you guys, you actually put your rods in there?
That's not for your sandwich?
Yeah, we had them all over the theme parks. I mean, we had and every day, I mean, they were swapped out and maintained. You had temperatures monitored, the whole deal.
All right.
That was kind of that was a big thing. I was like, oh, I guess it really does matter, because I used to just grab them out of the back of the work truck, just a handful of 7018s out of the box that'd been, we opened it on Monday. Here it is Thursday, and you're out there welding stuff, and you don't know what you don't know, and there's nobody there to enforce it.
Right. Well, another one we get along in that avenue around here for Arizona, our humidity's so low almost all the time. Everybody goes, oh, well, this is Arizona. We don't have to worry about that rod getting wet. Uh-huh. Okay. Let me show you something. And there's lots of ways you can show them that rod is that it's no good anymore. They left it out overnight, and now it's got too much moisture in it, and you get hydrogen cracking in your welds and all kinds of issues. And the worst of it is around here in the summertime when it gets the hottest, we have what we call the monsoons that come through this time of year. And these guys don't realize it. They'll come up to my area on a job because they're the big fabricators. There's very few pre-approved fabricators up here. So these guys come up out of Phoenix, start welding, leave their rod out in their scissors lifts and high lifts and whatever, go back down home for the night. Monsoons roll through, soak everything down. They come up the next morning, they grab the rods that they left right there in the scissors lift, and they start welding. And you're going, whoa, throw it all away. Start over.
Yep.
They're going, what? I tell people all the time, for these little companies or little jobs in our area, don't buy the 50-pound tins. Buy the 10-pound pop tops and have a rod oven to drop it into when you do open it. But you're going to lose a lot less rod that way than opening those 50-pounders, using 2 pounds of it, leaving it sit out here, going home, and then coming back and having to throw the whole thing away the next day. So, but sometimes they learn, sometimes they don't.
Yeah, there's a couple companies, they make 1 and 2 pound tubes. I think if you're not going to use a rod oven, use those. As long as it's hermetically sealed, run that.
Right.
That's probably the easiest, cheapest solution until you invest in a rod oven.
Right.
Those things aren't cheap.
No.
I need to buy one for the school. It's like, man, I got to take out a small loan.
Well, and then you get they buy the rod oven, but they either don't plug it into their welder, or their welder's off all night anyway.
Yeah, that's not going to help you.
Yeah, so what difference did that make? Either leave it on the job site and have it plugged into the power source there, or take it back and take it into the hotel room. But if you come to the job site and I put my hand on that rod and it's not already at 250 degrees, you're going to throw it away and open a new can. That's all there is to it.
Yeah, I know some of the guys that they run rig trucks and stuff doing mobile repairs. They have the small ones. They'll plug it in, at the garage of the house at night, and then when they go to get in their truck in the next morning, they've got inverters on their truck.
Yeah.
So they'll run it off that pretty much all day, and then they'll get back home and unplug it real quick, walk into the shop, plug it back in, they're good to go. So that you're protecting your investment, and then it also shows that you're doing your due diligence.
Yes.
And somebody that's willing to something as simple as keep their rods at the right temperature, they're going to do a quality job when they get there.
Right. Yep.
Yeah, there's just so many little nuances to this welding stuff. But like, you don't know what you don't know. So like we were talking about, at the beginning of the podcast, like having a mentor, whether that's in inspection or whether it's, in welding, find a mentor. And like some of the best ways to do that are at your local AWS section meetings. I know you were a chairman for a couple years for your section, correct?
Yes, I was Arizona section chairman for about 5 years and chairman of the certification committee. I'm not positive. I think that I haven't seen the printout yet, but I volunteered to be second vice chairman again now for the next cycle down here.
Okay, so you're still pretty actively involved with your section.
Yeah, I went to several meetings once we got started back up after COVID and stuff, and going back in if they want me to be a section officer again. Beyond that, then I've served on some qualification and certification through national on the exam bank. I serve on the B1 committee and a couple of its subcommittees, and then the organizing committee for the Inspections Expo and Conference that you were talking about that we were at down in Austin, which is going to be in St. Louis this year in the first week of February, first or second week of February in 2020.
Okay, yeah, I'd have to pull that up because I know last year it was in November, and it's so IEC's every other year, right? Same, and then the Weld Summit's in between.
We're trying to do it every year, maybe. We'll see how it goes. The main reason it took, so our very first one, we started organizing in 2018, and we had it in January of 2020 in Houston, and then because of COVID, everything got put totally on hold. And we started trying to have one in 2022, and there was just still too many companies shut down, too many hotels and travel that were still an issue. So we put it off and we waited until 2023. Doing it in the fall has many drawbacks between FabTech and other organizations that have other big gatherings. So we tried, since the very first one in January was so successful, we moved it back up to a winter time frame in St. Louis.
Okay.
We're trying to do similar to FabTech and maybe move around a little bit, but mainly find a few key places that will be central for people to get to and rotate the location. And we'll just have to see how it works out for attendance, whether it will continue to be every year or go to an every other year. It's hard when you're incorporating AISC, AWS, NDTMA, which is basically an offshoot of ASNT. It's our NDE people. And who am I forgetting? AMP.
AMP or NACE.
Yeah. Excuse me, AMP. I didn't mean.
Don't forget AMP.
Those guys will shoot me big time. So, when you got so many different organizations, it's fun to try and pull stuff together without conflicting with some of their other conferences and or burning out all of our speakers. We want to be able to give people some new faces, not the same old ones all the time. But on the other hand, between all the conferences that people teach at, after a while you burn people out, because a lot of this stuff, just like our committee work, is all volunteer work. And for guys like me, running my own right now without my boys helping me anymore, just a one-man shop, I'm out pay because I'm not working production here when I'm gone. I've got to pay travel, I got to pay hotel, I got to pay food. There's a lot of expense that goes into a person being active with committee work, volunteer speaking, and everything else. Don't get me wrong, I love doing it, and I'll do it as much as I can wherever and whoever wants me to. But there's only so much a person can do.
Yeah. I'm really looking forward to attending the next one. I thought we were going to have one this year, but 2024. But if it's February 2025,
yeah,
I should be able to make that one. This year, I'm kind of dialing back, and honestly, I probably wouldn't have gone to FabTech in Vegas this year. But luckily, it's going to be in Orlando, so I've got no excuse whatsoever. Just because, like, opening the new school and everything, and setting up the testing center, like it's been quite a bit. So, and like you said, stepping away for a week, that's a week's worth of production. That's a week's worth of income, like all that stuff. As a business owner, it adds up exponentially quicker than when I was an employee. When I was working at the school, it's like, hey, I want to put in for 3-4 days of vacation. So I'm getting paid while I'm going out to the conference. And, plus we had travel expenses and all that through the college because it was continuing education, to maintain my CWI, but also, as an instructor, they always pushed us to get continued education training. So it just kind of worked out. But being a small business owner, it's like, I don't have that perk anymore. So I really got to pick and choose which conferences and stuff that I want to get out to.
Absolutely. If I might throw one more thing in there in regards to this work, committee work and stuff, as well as conferences, but committee work especially, I encourage as many smaller business owners as possible. Get involved in committee work. We need more CWIs and more people from the working community on a lot of our committees. Everybody's smart enough to, if I can do it, anybody can do it. But we need a lot of people to fill in this. A lot of our guys are starting to retire. And there's a lot of holes in the first place. It's volunteer, but just pick one thing that really piques your interest and get involved. Even if you only do it for 3-4 years, because we need all the help we can get. They've made it easier with Zoom meetings and GoToMeeting and a lot of your computer internet stuff, so you don't have to show up at every single meeting. As long as you are able to review things, attend the meetings virtually with the internet, you don't have to always travel to get to the meeting anymore. Now, they like to see a certain amount of real face time, but we don't have to travel to every single meeting now. So it's easier for people to get involved and not have to miss quite so much as far as work and travel and all that money going out. So please, if anybody that can, look into it at least. See if there's something that you're interested in and can do your part to help out.
Now, Brent, what's the best way to get involved? Is I'm assuming AWS.org. You'd be able to find the information on how to get involved with the committees.
The new website in particular has spots all over the place for clicking a button that says join a committee or look at the committees, find out who's on the committees already. So there's lots of things on there. You can easily go to aws.org and just start going through the website. Especially if you go into the certifications button and look and down through there's all kinds of stuff on asking if you want to serve on a committee. So it's pretty easy to find. It only takes a couple of minutes of due diligence, and you can find the right area to go to and find a committee and get to work.
Awesome. And while you're there, you hit that membership tab and sign up. Sign up to become a member.
Absolutely.
And if you're a student memberships are now free. So
absolutely.
Definitely take advantage of that. There's a lot of benefits to the student membership.
Any student who is not a member is missing out big time right now. There's so much available to you as a student, and it's a free membership right now.
Yeah, I almost want to set up a computer bank because we do quite a bit of what the Central Florida section. We have a pretty heavy student population that attend most of our technical demonstration meetings. I almost want to set up, 4 or 5 computers and say, hey, as you walk through the door, just go ahead and sign up and get your membership.
There you go.
Because it's completely free. Because students, you tell them and they're like, yeah, I'm going to get into this. And then something happens 10 seconds later and they're like, oh yeah, it just kind of passes in the breeze.
So do you have a student chapter?
We don't because when I know, I need to work on that. But the problem, so when I was teaching at the college, we had them for such a short amount of time because their program, and now it's even shorter. They're down to 28 weeks. Oh, wow. When I was teaching, it was 44. So it's not like your typical college level, where they're, or even at high school, you got them for 2-3 years, so you can kind of, that last group can pass on the baton. I mean, they're going there to get career ready. So it's a very short-term center focused training aspect. I'd like to, I want to link up, and I may have an in now with one of the local high schools to be able to start that program. And that's the high school that I attended when I was going through welding school. I would love to set up a student chapter over there. And I think I've got I don't have a new instructor, but I know the new instructor that is taking a position within that school, and she's very heavily attends all of our section meetings and stuff. So I may have an in to set up the student chapter finally.
Well, that's a great resource for those students also, and through that, I mean, sure, they can have their own meetings, but then get them involved in the regular section meetings also.
100%. I mean, that was probably one of the things that changed the trajectory of my career was as an educator, I got involved with our local section up in Northwest Florida. JT Mahoney and Howard Record were running that. I don't know if you've ever met them across your journeys, but
I know the names,
both of them,
but
great people, but they're the ones that kind of took me under their wings. You know, they wanted me to join their section up there, and I was like, I'd love to, but you know, it's a bit of a drive. It was 2 hours to get up there, and I was like, tell me more about setting up my own section in Orlando.
so
So that's kind of that's the route that I went instead.
now, Jason, you don't really have an excuse because where I live, all my section meetings are a 2-hour drive for me to get to them.
I didn't have an excuse. You get it. Well, I wanted more of I didn't have a problem making the trip, but I wanted more of my students to attend.
Yeah.
And that always seemed to be the problem is they didn't, they're young, they're not relatively employed, they've got somewhat reliable transportation, but a 4-hour round trip on a Thursday night, a lot of them weren't going to do it. So we'd carpool, a bunch of them would carpool. But I was like, if I can get this many, this much attention and traction to go to a section meeting on a Thursday night for a 4-hour round trip, there's probably enough interest in Central Florida to get one going.
There you go.
So we did. We stood that up in 2017, and it's been going pretty strong ever since. We just had a technical meeting last Thursday with Rockmount Research and Alloys came to the shop. So all the students came out. Well, not students and members came out, and they got to demo some of the rods and electrodes and stuff that they had, and we did some giveaways and raffles. It was a good time.
Shannon with Weld Like a Girl just did our first one that we've done in a long time. We had started this back when I was section chairman, and Nick Martinez, who's going to be our new district director, started it now again. We're doing, because the whole state of Arizona is one section. And granted, most of our membership is down in Phoenix and or Tucson, but we have lots of members spread all around the state. So we actually went to Yuma and had a meeting down there. Tom Leonard came down, and Shannon and myself and a couple others, and we had a meeting in Yuma, and we're doing remote meetings now so that people don't have to do so much traveling. And another advantage of like your Zoom meetings and different things, and I think through AWS they're setting something up. You can have a camera or a computer set up at your regular section meeting and basically live stream that to anybody who wants to pick it up any place in the state. And so they're making our meetings easier for people to be able to get to, even if you're working and you can't get there that night, or it's too far to drive, whatever the reasons are. They're making this easier and easier. And I think just like with your program, they're even archiving them so you can go back and view them later.
Oh, very cool.
So
we tried that during, it probably wasn't during COVID, but we did a couple technical demonstrations when everybody was still kind of distancing. But we tried them via Zoom, and we had like one person show up. So I was like, okay, that's maybe not worth getting everything set up. But I mean, it could be different now, because a lot more. Granted, attendance was relatively low then anyway, because it was, just I guess that time of the year. But yeah, it'd probably be worth a shot doing it once again, because I know a lot of people from like West Coast and North Central Florida, because I think we have 5 sections in the state of Florida. I know a lot of them want to come out, but again, that's why we did it in Orlando, because everything else is 2 hours away.
right.
So that's probably not a bad idea, especially if they're going to archive them now. I got to look into that and figure out, the best way, because I'd like to set up a good, like a quality microphone to be able to do that, to where, if it's getting recorded, it's
So you can hear
suitable
them.
to rewatch later. Yeah.
Yep.
Very cool. Yeah, I got to check that out. Well, Brent, it's been a pleasure talking to you, sir. I'm hoping, are you going to be down for FabTech in Orlando?
I don't know.
Okay.
My-
If
my-
not, I'll see you in St. Louis.
Well, my wife is having some health issues right now, and we're trying to get up. My mom just turned 91 here in June, and we haven't seen her for a couple of years. We're trying to get up to Oregon to see her. This is going to be a busy year, so I'm not sure. I want to, but hey, like I said, you can only do so much.
Right. Well, I appreciate you taking the time to chat out here on the podcast, and I'll definitely see you up there in St. Louis in February.
All right, sounds good. Looking forward to it.
Awesome, thank you, sir. Oh, before we get out of here, why don't you tell people where they can find you? I know you're very active on the AWS forums as well as LinkedIn. So if somebody wanted to reach out to you, what's the best way to get a hold of you?
Either one of those, you can get a hold of me with a private message, but then I think both of those also have my phone numbers and email. My email is cwinspectorbrent@gmail.com. And if you look up ArcTech Welding, it should take you to either my welding or inspections website, and you can get to me through that. My information's all over the place. I'm not a secret.
Okay. Fantastic. Well, once again, thank you, sir. I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to come on here and share your wealth of knowledge with the listeners.
All right. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for tuning into this month's episode of Weld Wednesdays with AWS, brought to you by the American Welding Society. For more information on how you can get involved with AWS, just head on over to the website, aws.org. I hope you all have a great rest of your week. Stay safe out there, and until next time, make every weld better than your last.